Night over northern France carried a strange stillness, one that didn't belong to war. It settled over the fields and villages like a heavy blanket of ash, muffling the echoes of distant artillery, swallowing the glow of burning fuel depots, hiding the scars of the day beneath a restless, living fog. The clouds above were torn open by the wind, jagged like ripped cloth, revealing slivers of moonlight that shimmered against the smoke drifting across the sky. Up there, in that shifting half-light, a lone Bf-109 sliced through the cold air, engine rattling with the exhaustion of a long pursuit. The pilot, Lieutenant Riedel, shifted in his seat, adjusting the straps digging into his shoulders. His breath fogged against the inside of his canopy. He blinked, eyes burning from hours of flying, yet unable to shake the sense that something was wrong. He had flown countless missions. He had outmaneuvered Spitfires, danced through tracer fire from Mustangs, survived flak bursts so close the shockwaves had rattled his bones. But tonight felt different, too quiet, too clean, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself the Americans had nothing in this sector tonight. He told himself their new monster fighter, that bloated metal beast he had laughed about with his comrades, would never dare wander this far from a bomber formation. He repeated those thoughts like a prayer. Yet the silence only grew heavier. Below, the fog shifted, rolling across the fields like a restless creature. Villages disappeared, reappeared, then vanished again beneath its churning surface. The moonlight caught the tops of the clouds, turning them into a glowing ocean. It was beautiful in the way storms were beautiful right before they broke. Riedel dropped his altitude slightly, testing the air. The Bf-109 protested with a subtle shudder. He steadied it with practiced fingers. Then he heard it, a sound he couldn't place at first. Not the slap of wind against the canopy, nor the groan of metal under stress. It was deeper, almost a growl vibrating through the night like thunder trapped inside a cavern. He frowned and checked his gauges. All normal. The growl came again. Stronger, closer. Riedel craned his neck, scanning the darkness behind him. Nothing. Only clouds and moonlight and the long, yawning black of open sky. He eased the throttle forward, just a little. The Bf-109 surged ahead. The sound followed. A chill ran up his spine. He knew the American Thunderbolt was powered by a massive radial engine, an absurdly big one, big enough that German pilots joked it was an aircraft built around a tractor engine. They mocked its size, its weight, its clumsy silhouette. An elephant trying to fly, they had called it. Too slow, too heavy, too blind. But none of that explained this sound. This presence. Riedel swallowed. His throat felt dry. The growl shifted into a rolling thunder, deep enough that he felt it in his ribs. It wasn't the sharp hum of a Daimler-Benz engine, nor the smooth purr of a Merlin. This was something else entirely raw, heavy, relentless. He climbed slightly, hoping for clearer air. The clouds parted, revealing a shimmering field of stars. For a moment, he felt relief. Then the stars disappeared, blocked by a shadow. A massive shape emerged from above the clouds, silent at first, then roaring to life as it rolled over into a shallow dive. The moonlight hit it in fragments, a broad fuselage, thick wings, a silhouette that didn't belong to any German plane. The shape vanished again, swallowed by the fog. Riedel's heart hammered in his chest. He tightened his grip on the stick and scanned frantically. The sky answered with light. A burst of white-hot tracers tore downward from above, slicing through the clouds like falling stars. They illuminated the fog in violent flashes, revealing the unmistakable outline of a P-47 Thunderbolt as it dropped into its attack. Riedel yanked his plane into a desperate roll, but the air vibrated with the impact of 50 caliber rounds stitching across his fuselage. Each hit sounded like a hammer against metal, sharp and final. He dove. The fog rushed up to meet him, a wall of swirling white. He plunged into it, letting the darkness swallow him, hoping the American would lose sight. But the Thunderbolt didn't need sight. Its engine roared above him, growing louder, closer, angrier, an avalanche of sound bearing down through the clouds. The next burst of tracers ripped past his canopy, blinding him with their brightness. He pulled up, forcing the Bf-109 into a climb so steep His vision narrowed to a tunnel. The American stayed on him. Riedel broke left. It followed. He tried a snap roll. The roar behind him only grew stronger. And in the chaos of that chase, the truth crystallized with horrifying clarity. The pilots were wrong. The jokes were wrong. Everything they believed about the Thunderbolt was wrong. This wasn't a slow, lumbering brute. This wasn't a clumsy escort fighter. This wasn't something to laugh at. It was a machine built for one purpose only: to fall out of the sky like a hammer and crush anything beneath it. The fog lit up a final time as 8 streams of 50 caliber fire converged on his aircraft. Riedel closed his eyes. The sky erupted. Dawn had not yet broken, but the German airfield at Cambrai was already alive with the metallic clatter of tools and the clipped voices of ground crews. Frost clung to the wings of the PF-109 seconds lined in precise rows, their silhouettes sharp and predatory under the pale floodlights. Mechanics wiped oil from their hands, officers scrolled over maps, and pilots, young, confident, wearing leather jackets and half-smiles, gathered around a pot of steaming coffee, as if the war were something happening far away. They were tired, yes, but not afraid. Not yet. Lieutenant Riedel had not returned, but that alone didn't concern them. Night missions were notoriously chaotic. Radios failed. Engines froze. Fog swallowed entire squadrons. By morning, someone usually limped back with a cracked canopy and a half-frozen grin. The men joked about it as they sipped their coffee. "He probably ran into one of those American elephants," one pilot quipped, mimicking the wingspan of a P-47 with exaggerated arms. "Tried to turn with it and died of laughter. Or it died trying to climb," another added. Too heavy to chase, too slow to run, too stupid to survive. Laughter rolled through the group, light, easy, dismissive. For months, they had mocked the Americans' newest fighter, the one rumored to be escorting bombers deeper and deeper into the Reich. German intelligence reports were shallow, inconsistent, often coated with arrogance. They all said the same thing: it's big, it's heavy, it's unrefined, nothing to worry about. That was all the pilots needed to hear. To them, the Americans were an industrial power, with no finesse builders of refrigerators, cars, and absurd flying machines. They imagined assembly lines filled with men who had never tasted war, who welded metal with the same detachment one built a tractor. They believed America's air tactics lacked elegance, that their pilots relied on brute force instead of skill. "Americans don't fly," Oberfeldwebel Kapp once said. "They operate machinery." The others nodded, convinced. Their own aircraft, the lithe Bf-109, the savage Forf 190, were the masterpieces of Europe. Precision engineering, slender wings, deadly agility, machines built by artisans, not factories. They took pride in that difference. It gave them identity, superiority, a reason to believe they still owned the sky. And yet, beneath all that pride, a faint unease lingered, something unspoken, something none of them would admit out loud. Because if America's machines were so clumsy, so inferior, then why were they seeing more of them every week? Why were bomber formations growing larger, steadier, harder to break? And why did some German pilots claim the new American escort fighter dove faster than anything they'd ever seen? The unease did not erase their confidence, it only whispered under it, like a thin crack beneath a polished surface. As the morning briefing began, the pilots gathered in a narrow hut filled with maps and cigarette smoke. The operations officer tapped a wooden pointer against a large chart pinned to the wall. "Reconnaissance confirms increased American bomber activity to the west. They're pushing deeper, closer to our fuel depots. The 56th Fighter Group has been sighted escorting them." A few pilots snorted under their breath. "Ah, yes," someone muttered. "The flying milk jugs." "Oh." The officer shot a glare in his direction, but didn't argue. He knew better than to lecture men who risked their lives every day. He simply continued. "Intelligence notes improvements in their climb rate and sweep tactics. Treat all encounters with caution." More quiet snickering, but one man didn't laugh. Major Karl Voss, the Staffelkapitän, stood apart from the others, arms crossed, brow furrowed, his eyes fixed on the map. He had flown since Spain, had watched empires rise and collapse in the span of a dogfight. He trusted experience, not rumors. and experience told him something was changing. He had seen the Thunderbolts himself days earlier, huge, blunt-nosed machines that moved with unsettling confidence. They didn't flinch under flak. They didn't shy away from dives that would tear lesser aircraft apart. They kept formation at altitudes where even his 109 gasped for breath. He knew the men wouldn't understand, not yet. They hadn't seen what he had. They didn't hear the hum of a radial engine as a threat, didn't feel the way the air trembled when one of those American giants passed overhead. They believed what they wanted to believe, that the Luftwaffe still ruled the sky. But Voss had lived through too many illusions to trust comfort. After the briefing, he stepped outside, lighting a cigarette with cold fingers. The sun was beginning to rise, smearing orange across the horizon. Crews rolled out fuel drums. Mechanics warmed engines. The hum of preparation filled the air. He closed his eyes and listened. For years, the sound of German fighters warming up had been the sound of dominance. The crisp bark of a Daimler-Benz, the sharp, metallic cough before ignition. Even the smell burnt oil and frost contained a certain pride. But somewhere in the distance, carried faintly by the wind, he heard something else. A low growl, a heavy rumble, like thunder pulled across the sky by chains. He opened his eyes. The men around him didn't notice. They laughed, boasted, tightened their flight boots. They still believed the stories that the Americans built toys, not weapons. Voss took a slow drag from his cigarette. Arrogance was its own kind of blindness, and the Luftwaffe had been blind before caught off guard by machines they dismissed, strategies they underestimated, enemies they believed couldn't possibly match German skill. And now, far above the rising sun, a new sound rolled across the sky, distant, patient, inevitable. The sound of a power they still didn't understand. The sound of a killer they still believed was a joke. The sound of the P-47 coming for them. The first alarm came just after midday brief, clipped, unceremonious. A teleprinter clattered to life in the command hut, coughing out a thin strip of paper that fluttered in the stale air before an officer seized it. His eyes widened. He didn't shout. He didn't call for calm or organization. He simply stepped outside and blew his whistle. Within seconds, the airfield transformed. Pilots sprinted from barracks, half-dressed and fastening harnesses on the run. Mechanics rolled bombs aside and shouted over engines kicking violently to life. Fuel drums toppled. Officers barked orders that dissolved into the roar of spinning propellers. This wasn't routine. This wasn't practice. This was fear. Above them, far above, so distant they at first looked like drifting snow, the American bomber stream appeared. Then another behind it. And another. The shimmering formation stretched from horizon to horizon, a moving wall of light catching the sun like an endless fleet of mirrored sharks. WWII, one mechanic whispered. Too many. Major Voss didn't waste a second. He slammed his canopy down, signaled his ground crew to pull the chocks, and rammed the throttle forward. His 109 lurched down the runway, tail rising, engine screaming, wheels bouncing against the frost-hardened earth, before he clawed his way into the cold air. The squadron followed, some disciplined, others frantic, all painfully aware they were rising to meet something larger than anything they had faced in months. But the bombers weren't the shock. The shock came a moment later. From the edges of the bomber stream, like wolves separating from a herd, the American escorts emerged, dozens upon dozens of dark shapes glinting under the sun, wings thick, noses blunt, engines enormous. Thunderbolts. The pilots at Cambrai had joked about them less than an hour earlier. Now those same men felt their stomachs turn as the massive fighters fanned out, locking into a loose but purposeful screen. "Got," one radioed, voice thin with disbelief. "They're everywhere." Voss didn't respond. He didn't have to. His eyes were fixed on the shapes streaming toward them, heavy, but moving with unsettling confidence, their radial engines thundering like rolling artillery. Then the rumble grew louder, closer, hungrier. The two forces closed the distance fast, too fast for comfort, too fast for plans. And then the sky broke open. The first clash came high above the rooftops of a farming village. Voss led his men in a shallow climb, angling to cut into the bombers while avoiding the escorts. But the Thunderbolts reacted instantly, breaking apart like a school of predators responding to the scent of blood. One dived straight at them. Voss saw it coming, a massive silver machine, sunlight flashing across its fuselage, the propeller a blurred halo of fury. Instinct told him it shouldn't be able to dive that fast. Logic insisted it should have torn itself apart. But the Americans weren't playing by logic today. He rolled hard right, pulling his 109 into a steep turn. The Thunderbolt followed not as tight, but with terrifying momentum. Its energy simply overwhelmed the sky around it. Voss dove, trying to shake it. Below him, he saw two of his younger pilots making the mistake every German pilot made against the P-47 the first time, trying to turn with it. One yank of the Thunderbolt's stick, one burst from its 8 50-caliber guns, and the air erupted into a ribbon of white tracers. The first German plane disintegrated mid-turn, wing torn clean off, fuselage spinning like a burning hammer. The second tried to break away but was swallowed by a storm of bullets that carved through metal like angry chisels. It burst into flames, spiraling down in a trail of black smoke. Voss cursed under his breath, pulling up sharply. He had seen guns. He had seen firepower, but he had never seen this. 8 heavy machine guns firing so densely, so fast, that the rounds seemed to form a continuous beam of destruction. Each burst looked like a white-hot rope stretching across the sky, and anything that crossed it simply ceased to be. He leveled out, breath ragged, and scanned the sky. The battle had become chaos. Thunderbolts dove through German formations with the indifference of falling boulders, firing short, precise bursts that shredded aircraft in seconds. Their engines howled as they pulled out of dives at speeds no Daimler-Benz engine could match for long. Everywhere Voss looked, German fighters were scattering, some diving for the safety of cloud cover, others breaking in long arcs to escape the escorts and reach the bombers. But the bombers weren't the danger anymore. The real danger was the storm of silver giants surrounding them. One pilot, Feldwebel Dawn, pulled his foe 190 into a full-power climb, hoping altitude might give him a chance. The 190 was a brutal climber at low and medium altitudes. He'd relied on that strength for years. He never made it. A Thunderbolt came at him from above, inverted, nose angled down with absurd aggression. Dawn barely had time to register the shape before the P-47 unleashed a long burst. The tracers walked across his fuselage, slicing through the cockpit. The 190 pitched forward, hissed fire from the engine, and spiraled into the clouds. Another German, trying to disengage, made the mistake of diving straight down, unaware that this was the Thunderbolt's territory. The P-47 behind him tucked its wings and dropped with the weight of a falling building. The German pilot watched, horrified, as the massive American machine not only kept pace but gained on him. He pushed his throttle to the limit. The altimeter spun. The ground rushed up. The Thunderbolt didn't waver. A split second before pulling out, the American fired. The tracer line ripped across the sky, and the German fighter exploded into a fireball that lit the underside of the clouds. Above the carnage, Voss tried to rally what remained of his squadron. "Reform, reform, stay in pairs." His voice cracked mid-sentence. A P-47 burst up from below, firing in a tight arc that forced him into a violent evasive roll. The airframe groaned, his vision blurred, his harness cut into his chest. He leveled out, gasping. Another burst tore past his canopy, so close he felt the shockwave in his ribs. Voss pulled into a climbing spiral, forcing the 109 into a maneuver it hated anything to escape the massive fighter behind him. The American followed briefly, then broke away, choosing a cleaner target below. That decision chilled Voss more than the bullets. The American pilots weren't reckless. They weren't clumsy. They weren't the amateurs German propaganda had painted them to be. They were selective, patient, deadly. They hunted with discipline. Down near the bomber stream, the shock grew even worse. Thunderbolts swooped ahead of the bombers, firing into German fighters before they even got close. Their presence alone broke attacks apart. And when a German fighter tried to cut through the formation, a P-47 simply rolled into its path with the force of a battering ram. One German pilot pulled up to line a shot at a B-17. Before he could even fire, a Thunderbolt appeared from nowhere, wings brimming with fire. The rounds tore through his engine block, blowing it apart in a spray of smoke and debris. His canopy shattered. The fighter pitched nose down, trailing smoke as it fell. It all happened in seconds. To the Germans, it felt like lightning. To the Americans, it was precision. Voss managed to break into a pocket of relatively open sky, his 109 shaking from stress and shrapnel. He steadied his breathing, scanning for allies. He found only three out of more than 20 that had taken off. "Stay with me," he radioed, though he wasn't sure who could hear. "Stay close. We dive together." Before they could form up, a formation of Thunderbolts soared past them, huge, unmoving, implacable like a line of steel whales swimming through the sky. Their engines boomed, low and threatening, their shadows stretching across the clouds. They didn't even notice the 109 seconds. They didn't have to. The message was obvious. We control the altitude. We control the speed. We control the sky. The bombers below continued onward, steady and confident beneath their thunderous guardians. Voss felt his throat tighten. For years, he and his men had believed German engineering defined the sky. They believed skill was the final measure of supremacy. But skill could not change the fact staring him in the face. The Americans had built something different, something brutal, something overwhelming. And for the first time in his career, Voss felt truly, unmistakably outmatched. Not by a tactic, not by a pilot, not by a maneuver, but by force, by scale, by power, by the sheer industrial weight of a nation that could afford to build a fighter that was part tank, part artillery piece, part unstoppable force of nature. One Thunderbolt could dive faster than reason. 8 guns could erase an aircraft in seconds. And hundreds more were coming. Voss steadied his trembling hands on the controls. The illusion was shattered. The arrogance stripped away. Truth roared across the sky on radial engines. And in that truth, the German pilots finally saw what they had never expected to see. They were no longer the hunters. They were prey. Silence fell long before the last engine stopped burning. It wasn't the peaceful silence of dawn, nor the solemn quiet of churches or graves. This was heavier, thicker, an oppressive stillness that settled over the countryside like a shroud. Smoke drifted across the fields in thin, fragile ribbons. Wreckage smouldered on the edges of forests and villages, painting the horizon in faint strokes of black and copper. The roar of battle had vanished. Only the echoes remained. And somewhere between those fading echoes, Major Voss guided his battered Buff 109 toward a clearing that barely qualified as a landing strip. Oil streaked the canopy. The engine coughed with every shudder. Bullet holes dotted both wings like the marks of some great, indifferent monster. He touched down hard. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then skidded across the uneven ground until coming to a stop against a bank of churned soil. Voss leaned forward, chest heaving, hands gripping the stick long after the threat had passed. He didn't open the canopy. Not yet. He simply sat there, listening to the last murmurs of his dying engine. When he finally climbed out, he felt the weight of the air shift around him. Mechanics rushed to the wreck, but slowed when they saw the look on his face. One of them, a young man no older than 18, opened his mouth to speak some comment, some joke, some attempt to lighten the mood, but closed it again when he saw the smoke stains on Voss's flight suit, and the silence in his eyes. "How many returned?" Voss asked quietly. The mechanic hesitated. 3, sir." Voss closed his eyes. He didn't need to ask how many had taken off. He knew. He felt it. The illusion that had once carried the Luftwaffe into the skies, the belief in their unmatched superiority, had cracked. He could hear it breaking inside the men around him. Their breaths were shallow. Their hands shook as they touched the bullet-ridden aircraft. Their eyes avoided the open sky. Because the sky wasn't theirs anymore. Inside the briefing hut, the air felt colder than outside. Maps lay scattered on the table, corners curling from dampness. The chalkboard still displayed the morning's mission lines, sharp arrows drawn with conviction, confidence, certainty. Now those arrows looked delusional. A few surviving pilots sat in silence, staring blankly at nothing. Some rubbed their temples. Others tried to warm their hands around mugs of tea they weren't drinking. The steam curled upward, ignored. One of them, Oberfeldwebel Rant, finally spoke, but his voice cracked like old wood. What were those things? He didn't say Thunderbolt. He didn't say American fighter. He didn't even say enemy. He said things, as if the machines they had fought could not possibly be understood in the same terms as their own. Another pilot, Cap, the loudest joker of the morning, sat with his gloves still on, staring at the table as if afraid to lift his gaze. His hair was matted with sweat. His jaw trembled. "They don't fly like fighters," he whispered. "They fall. They fall with control. And when they fire—" He stopped. His breath hitched. No one laughed. No one teased him. They all knew the sound of 8.50 caliber guns. Now the ripping roar that shook the air and carved brilliant lines of destruction across the sky. A young lieutenant leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I saw one taking hits that would have killed a 109 twice over," he murmured. "They're built like tanks," another muttered. "No," Voss said quietly, sitting at the head of the table. "They're built like answers." The room turned toward him. He continued, voice slow but unwavering. "Answers to everything we've relied on, our speed, our precision, our engineering, our belief that the enemy could not match us." He tapped his gloved finger against the table. "They have replaced finesse with force, strategy with production, skill with overwhelming weight." A mechanic entered, holding a sheet of paper. Voss took it. It was a casualty report. He did not need to read the names. Every line was a ghost. Outside, the sky had brightened. The fog was lifting. But instead of revealing clarity, the morning light revealed ruin. Burned-out fuselages lay scattered across fields like fallen beasts. Blackened stretches of earth marked where wrecks had plunged into the ground. A wing, just a wing, hung from a tree, metal twisted like torn cloth. Two soldiers knelt beside what remained of an FW-190, its cockpit charred, its nose buried deep in the soil. They worked in silence, cutting away the metal to retrieve what was left inside. When they lifted the stretcher, a piece of the torn canopy slid off and clattered to the ground. The sound echoed like a verdict. Farther down the field, 3 Thunderbolts crossed overhead, just 3, flying in loose formation. Their engines hummed steadily, their silhouettes immense against the morning Sunday. They weren't attacking. They weren't even watching. They were simply passing by, like creatures strolling through a territory that already belonged to them. Every man on the ground felt their presence. A few looked up, flinching. One soldier gripped his rifle as if that could change something. Another turned away entirely, unable to face the sky. Voss didn't flinch. He stared at the passing fighters, studying their wings, their engines, their uncanny aura of durability. The factory-made giants. The machines Germany had mocked. The machines Germany now feared. Later, in his quarters, a dim wooden room with a single cot and a bent metal lamp, Voss sat alone, hands clasped, listening to the soft rustle of wind through the cracks in the walls. On his desk lay 3 letters, one from a pilot's wife, one from a father, one from a boy too young to understand that his brother would not come home. He hadn't opened them yet. He didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a family that their sons had been outmatched not by bravery nor by skill, but by something as cold and impersonal as industrial might? How do you write that? A knock sounded. It was Cap. The swagger was gone from his shoulders. His eyes were red, not from wind but from something deeper. "Sir," he said quietly, stepping inside. "What do we do now?" Voss didn't respond at first. He stood, walked to the small window, and looked out over the airfield. They were simply passing by, like creatures strolling through a territory that already belonged to them. Every man on the ground felt their presence. A few looked up, flinching. One soldier gripped his rifle as if that could change something. Another turned away entirely, unable to face the sky. Voss didn't flinch. He stared at the passing fighters, studying their wings, their engines, their uncanny aura of durability. The factory-made giants. The machines Germany had mocked. "We endure," he said, until we can't. Cap swallowed hard. And after that? Voss didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already written in the sky, etched in smoke and burning metal. That night, as darkness crept over the shattered landscape, Voss walked the edge of the airfield alone. The wind carried faint smells, burnt oil, singed fabric, the ash of wrecked machines. A few embers still glowed among the debris, pulsing with the memory of fire. He reached the far end of the field where a single Thunderbolt shell casing lay half buried in the dirt, thick, heavy, cold. He lifted it, feeling its weight, turning it in his hand. The casing had done its job. The fighter that fired it had done its job. The industry that produced the fighter had done its job. And now the Luftwaffe was paying the price for believing that engineering genius alone could hold back a nation capable of producing not the best machine, but the machine that could not be stopped. He dropped the casing. It sank into the soil with a dull thud. Behind him, the wind carried the faintest sound of distant engines. Not German. Never German anymore. Voss closed his eyes. The realization settled over him slowly, painfully. They weren't losing the air war. They had already lost it. And the sky had moved on without them. Morning returned with a kind of fragile gentleness, as if the sky itself were trying to forget what had happened the day before. A soft gold light spread slowly across the countryside, touching the broken fuselages scattered across the fields, the black scars carved into the earth, and the thin columns of smoke still curling upward in the cold air. The war had not paused, but for a moment it looked quieter. Major Voss stood alone near the end of the airfield, watching sunlight glint off the frost-covered grass. The ground crew moved slowly this morning. No joking, no shouting, only the dull rhythm of tools striking metal. Their movements were methodical, almost mechanical, as if the weight of the sky had finally seeped into their bones. A few meters away, the wreck of a Bf-109 sat like a monument to yesterday's truth. One wing missing, the propeller bent and charred, the cockpit glass shattered into a mosaic of jagged reflections. Someone had placed a pilot's scarf on the crushed frame, its ends fluttering weakly in the breeze. Voss didn't know who had done it. It didn't matter. The gesture said everything. A faint rumble echoed faintly from somewhere far beyond the horizon, so distant it could have been thunder. But the men on the ground stiffened anyway. They all knew the sound now. They all recognized it. Not thunder. Engines. American engines. The same deep, muscular growl that had torn through their formations, shattered their confidence, erased the line between hunter and hunted. The same sound that would soon shape the rest of the war. Voss didn't flinch. He simply watched the horizon, letting the sound roll over him like a slow, inevitable tide. It didn't bring fear anymore, only recognition. The war was no longer about who flew better. It was about who could keep flying at all. Later that afternoon, reports came from nearby units, similar battles, similar losses, similar stories of Thunderbolts diving through German defenses with unstoppable momentum. For every aircraft the Luftwaffe repaired, the Americans sent 10 more into the sky. For every squadron that struggled to regroup, the Americans deployed entire wings. The imbalance wasn't tactical. It wasn't even strategic. It was existential. Voss sat in the mess hall with a cup of bitter coffee, staring through the open doorway at the crews patching aircraft outside. The room was quiet, but not empty. Men sat in corners writing letters home. Others smoked with trembling hands. A few just stared at their boots, as if trying to remember what certainty had once felt like. On the wall beside the door, someone had pinned a small map of Germany. It was tattered, edges torn, dotted with tiny holes where pins had once marked operational bases. Most of those pins were gone now. The silence settled again, not heavy this time, but thoughtful, like a collective inhale that no one dared release. Voss finally stood, walked outside, and let the wind carry the ash-scented air across his face. He looked toward the west, where faint contrails lingered against the pale sky, white lines stretching endlessly toward a land that seemed to produce steel and fire as easily as breath. He thought of the Thunderbolt again, its massive shadow, its impossible dives, its brutal simplicity. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't refined, it wasn't even beautiful. but it had been enough. More than enough. War, he realized, didn't reward beauty. It rewarded abundance. In the late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and turned the fields copper, Voss walked along the perimeter fence. The wind stirred the tall grass. Birds circled high above, free in a sky that no longer belonged to the men who once believed they ruled it. He paused near the edge of a forest where fragments of twisted metal lay half buried in the soil, pieces of wings, burnt engine casings, scattered rounds that had never been fired. The remnants of both sides mixed together, indistinguishable in defeat and destruction. A single, .50 caliber casing gleamed among the debris. One of many. He knelt and picked it up, feeling the cold brass against his fingers. It was heavier than he expected. Solid. Industrial. Uncompromising. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. This, he murmured to himself, is the true language of this war. Not ideology, not strategy, not daring pilots weaving through clouds, but production. Raw, merciless, endless production. He placed the casing back into the earth and stood. As evening settled in, casting long shadows across the wounded airfield, Voss returned to the hangar. Mechanics had finished patching one of the surviving aircraft, a 109 with new wing panels and hastily repaired bullet damage. Its skin was a patchwork of metal shades, each rivet a reminder of yesterday's chaos. He walked around it slowly, hand trailing along the cool surface. This machine was fast, agile, precise, everything a fighter should be, but it was also alone. The Americans had machines like this too. Hundreds of them, thousands even, all waiting on assembly lines that stretched farther than the Luftwaffe's imagination. A quiet truth took root inside him. Wars aren't won by courage. They aren't won by the sharpest minds or the most beautiful machines. They're won by those who can build faster than the enemy can destroy. And America had learned to build faster than anyone in history. Night fell completely now, shrouding the airfield in deep blue. Lanterns flickered. The last repair crews packed their tools. The wind rustled the grass in slow, steady whispers. Voss stepped outside the hangar one last time and looked up. The stars glimmered faintly, distant and indifferent. He imagined the Thunderbolt somewhere beyond those stars, resting quietly under floodlights on faraway runways, waiting for the next mission. He imagined factories roaring through the night, stamping metal, forging engines, assembling wings, a nation building war machines as effortlessly as breathing. It took a long breath. The Luftwaffe had once believed it could outfly any enemy, but now he understood the final irony of this war. They weren't fighting pilots anymore. They were fighting production lines, and no amount of skill could outmaneuver that. As dawn approached once more, the fires on the horizon still burned, not bright enough to illuminate victory, but bright enough to reveal a truth no German pilot could ignore anymore. The skies no longer answered to them. They answered to the hum of American industry, steady, relentless, unending. And that, Voss realized, was the quiet, merciless cruelty of modern war. The battle was decided long before any pilot ever touched the clouds.